We have now come to the end of the official part of this meeting. There is now time to have a look at the exhibits at the other end of this hall, which illustrate the evolution of radio communication in the course of time. May I ask you to give precedence to His Royal Highness and the council members to go there first. At around 1 o'clock, those who want to can move to another hall in this building where sandwiches and coffee will be served, so that those participating in the afternoon excursion to the Dr. Neer laboratory of the PTT of the Netherlands will not have to disperse in order to get a meal. The meeting is closed.
John, yes.
Sorry, I invite you to come to the other side.
Ik kan niet klaar voor me staan. Ik denk dat het toch al wel bijzonder is misschien, maar laat jongen netjes, sorry. Nee, in ieder geval.
Zo, het gefeliciteerd, hè?
Nou, dank u. Het is vooral Piet heeft ook aan de scholing meegewerkt.
Today, live from Paris, Colombo, and Washington, and for audiences in London, Madrid, Rome, Bonn, Paris, and Stockholm, the United States Information Agency, in cooperation with the Communications Satellite Corporation, presents a special edition of WorldNet, celebrating the 20th anniversary of commercial satellite communication. Now, direct from the site of today's anniversary celebration, the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., here is your moderator and host, broadcast journalist Rod McLeish.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our 103rd WorldNet program. Today's program is a special edition in which we will look at commercial satellite communications, pioneered by ComSat with the early bird satellite 20 years ago today. As a result of this event, the way in which the world looks at itself has been revolutionized over the last 2 decades. This program commemorates that event. Some very special participants are included by videotape in today's broadcast. They are Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of Great Britain, Italian Premier Bettino Craxi, the President of Switzerland, Kurt Vogler, and the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. 20 years ago, their predecessors participated in the inaugural program transmitted by Early Bird. Our guests today on this WorldNet special edition have all played key roles in the satellite communication revolution. Joining us via satellite transmission from Colombo, Sri Lanka, is Dr. Arthur C Clarke, world-acclaimed scientist who foresaw the idea for communication satellites 40 years ago. Dr. Clarke is the author of 2001, A Space Odyssey. Via satellite from Paris, Commander Jacques Cousteau, internationally renowned environmentalist and oceanographer, a pioneer in the use of maritime satellites. And with me here at the National Press Club is former astronaut Captain Eugene Cernan, who holds the distinction of being the last man to leave his footprints on the surface of the moon. Captain Cernan is president of the Cernan Group, which is involved in space-related technology. In addition, we have Dr. Joseph Sharrock, head of ComSat, virtually from its beginning. Dr. Sharrock is commonly thought of as the father of the global communications satellite industry. Gentlemen, welcome to WorldNet.
Take us, team.
Count.
10, 9, 8,
Ignition.
Wonderful, folks.
Main stage. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
And when I am risen by fire, then shall I see the whole world. And in my light, men will see themselves.
April 6th, 1965. It was as if some prophecy, lost for eons in the sepulchres of mythology, had been fulfilled. Something new was moving across the heavens that evening, picking up the images and sounds of the world and flinging them back down across vast earthly distances.
Near Rome.
15, check.
Suddenly, because of that orbiting stranger in the sky, it was possible for people and nations separated by thousands of miles on Earth to become instant witnesses to each other's lives and to the whole world's events.
And wipe all the way through to the bird. Give me live via early bird, please. Give me live via early bird tell-off. Stand by the super tell-off.
War and peace.
Diana Francis.
Royal weddings.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur.
And the last rites of giants here, Charles de Gaulle, in which epochs of history also went to their graves.
Hundreds of thousands of
The earthbound passions of men and women were transmitted for the instruction or wonder of mankind by the Earth orbiters, the wondrous machines that gave new dimension to the name of satellite, by Early Bird, launched 20 years ago, and its descendants. There was something new in the heavens, and Earth would never be the same again.
20 years ago, when Early Bird was first launched, to receive a television broadcast or a telephone message by satellite was an exciting new adventure. Today, We take it for granted, and it's become commonplace. It's been like that with most new inventions. But this one was really rather special. It brought so much more knowledge into our hands. Knowledge about peoples the world over, their hopes, their tragedies, their problems, their needs. And we have to learn to use that knowledge to best advantage, theirs and ours. And then again, this invention enables us to flash a message across the arch of the heavens to almost anyone the world over. We have to make that message worthwhile. We've come a long way since that day in 1945 when a British scientist, Arthur Clarke, foresaw satellite communications. And I want to congratulate the United States Information Agency for turning his concept, his vision, into today's reality.
In questi 20 anni la tecnologia ha compiuto dei passi da gigante e quello che allora appariva come un avvenimento straordinario, la trasmissione di immagini in tempo reale per via satellite, oggi è diventato un normale evento di cui siamo partecipi della vita di ogni giorno. Questo successo della scienza e della tecnologia al quale siamo ormai abituati ha rivoluzionato in realtà la nostra vita, ha reso infatti la diffusione dell'immagine e dell'informazione facile ed immediata, contribuendo a favorire la distribuzione delle conoscenze, a rimuovere barriere di incomprensione fra i popoli. Ha migliorato l'utilizzazione delle risorse umane, ha cresciuto la concorrenza e la libertà dei mercati, rivitalizzando di riflesso l'economia mondiale. Il mio paese, l'Italia, che è fiera di aver dato i Natali a Guglielmo Marconi e a Meucci, saluta la ricorrenza odierna come una celebrazione emblematica e significativa dell'impegno dell'uomo, anche attraverso lo sviluppo dell'informazione e della comunicazione, diretto ad ampliare le prospettive dello sviluppo, ad accrescere il benessere dei popoli e a perseguire l'obiettivo di una sempre maggiore libertà ed anche di una pace sempre più sicura per tutta l'umanità.
Preparations for the voyage of Early Bird into orbit around the Earth began in August 1962 when Congress passed and President John F. Kennedy signed a bill authorizing the establishment of ComSat, a private corporation. Capitalized by the public sale of shares, ComSat set about assembling the basic components of satellite transmission. In 1964, an international telecommunications consortium, Intelsat, was created. More than 100 nations would eventually become members. Early Bird was launched into orbit around the world in the spring of 1965. From Earth stations like this one at Andover, Maine, signals were sent to the first satellite, which from its fixed position, 22,300 miles above the equator, beamed signals back over a vast area, approximately 1/3 of the world. And the signals could be received anywhere in the targeted area by dish antennae.
And start to stand on for.
On the 2nd of May, 1965, less than a month after Early Bird had been put into orbit, it transmitted the first live telecast between the Western Hemisphere and Europe. Russian sailors danced in the United Kingdom, and Mexicans danced in Mexico. And to demonstrate that satellite communications had potential far beyond instant news and entertainment, statesmen on both sides of the Atlantic sent each other greetings via Early Bird.
This moment marks a milestone in the history of communications between peoples and nations.
Thereafter, two histories evolved together. The history of the world over 20 critical, breathtaking, and sometimes dangerous years, and the history of satellite communications, which enabled the world to be, for the first time, both eavesdropper and eyewitness to its own great events as they happened.
United States Ambassador to Russia.
June 23rd, 1967, President Lyndon Johnson and Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin meet and confer on a college campus in Glassboro, New Jersey. In 1969, Intelsat satellites orbited the Earth to create a system covering and serving the whole world and the cosmos around it.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And all of mortal life, including the deaths of great men. On the 12th of November 1970, the world watched as France buried Charles de Gaulle in the little country church at Colombe des Deux Églises. As well as transporting instantaneously the pictures and sounds of news events from all over the world, other voices and images were also being lobbed into the heavens and beamed back across the distances of the world. The myriad voices that must speak to do the world's daily business were now transmitted from land to outposts half an ocean away, while through maritime satellite systems, the U.S. Navy and other ships sailing the world's seas spoke to each other and to the continents. And satellite technology brought people face to face, even though they were on opposite sides of the country. 10 years after the launching of Early Bird, satellite communications had become an integral part of life on Earth. A vast traffic in international telephone and telex communications, data transfer, and the hotlines which, an unknowable number of times, diffused crises and advanced the person-to-person confidence of statesmen. And always, ceaselessly, thanks to Early Bird and its descendant communication satellites, the world became witness to itself over the second decade. Watching via satellite, we saw the first steps toward accommodation, where, before, only the blindness of hostility had existed. And satellite communications brought other people's conflicts instantly halfway across the world to make them our conflicts, because we were engaged as witnesses to wars and the diplomacy of reconciliation.
Switzerland, in the heart of Europe, is happy to contribute to the well-functioning of Intelsat, one of today's most successful ventures in international cooperation, from which over 100 countries benefit daily. I'm confident that modern means of telecommunication bring the family of nations closer together, so that their people can live in freedom and peace, a goal Switzerland has always been striving for in its 700-years-old history. The Swiss government and the people of Switzerland are greeting all partners in France, wishing them happiness and prosperity.
As if to symbolize the technology that abolished distance and brought the peoples of the world together, we saw the link-up of Soviet cosmonauts and American astronauts in space.
Happy to see you.
And royal weddings on Earth. That night, 20 years ago, there was something new in the heavens, and Earth was radically changed forever. We could see as reality so much that had been beyond our conception because it took place far from the place where we stood upon the curve of the Earth. We could hear the persuasions of other people's leaders, the advent of new ideas, and the eternal beseechings of worship directly from the lips of the persuader, the philosopher, and the celebrant before God. Because of the man-made transmitters of the world's sounds and images from Earth to cosmos and back to Earth again, our sense of knowing became unshackled over these 20 years since that April day when Early Bird was launched. And the mortal voyage began anew on an ocean of wider visions than we had ever known before.
From wider vision comes wider responsibility. With this breathtaking overview of the world, thanks to Early Bird and its descendants, comes the need for greater communication among all people of the world. Advances in knowledge and technology can lead us either toward the path of conflict and attempted conquest, or across meadows of peace to the dreamed-of day when we turn our swords into plowshares. America long ago embarked on the latter path. We went to the moon and stared into the infinite depth of the universe, so that this country could make its contribution to the vision of freedom and peace. We're determined that such a vision will be the view from those new man-made moons, the children of Early Bird, which enable the world to see itself just as man catches a glimpse of the divine when he sees his own reflected face. America, the home of ComSat, the beginning of Intelsat, the launching place of Early Bird, will never cease its pursuit of the dream of freedom and peace.
I would like to begin today's press conference from the Press Club here in Washington with a question to you, Dr. Sharrock. The hijacking of TWA Flight 847 and the tension and diplomacy which have attended its aftermath have been much on all of our minds. How do you respond to questions about your industry's involvement in such events, your donation to the hijacker of a global audience?
Well, Rod, television is a very powerful tool, particularly global television. Terrorism, of course, goes back to the beginnings of history. So it's not surprising that terrorists would seek to use the most powerful tools available. That I think we can understand. On the other hand, I think there is another facet to that utilization, namely that people engaged in that sort of activity are able to get a feedback, to get a sense of world reaction to their actions. And also through those communication channels, I think we open the doors to possible solutions to these kinds of problems. Communications between peoples, I think, tends to solve problems. Without communications, misunderstandings develop, hostilities grow. And I've got to think in positive terms that although it's perfectly natural that people, in whatever activity they may be engaged, will use the most powerful tools available to them, that there is a two-way street here, and that through the mechanism that communications channels open up, there is a path to a solution to these problems. And we hope that in the coming days we will in fact see a solution to this very difficult situation that we've been witnessing on global telecommunications channels the last few days.
Thank you, Dr. Sharrock. As many of you know, when we have a guest on WorldNet, our questioning is open-ended. But today we have 4 guests. Each one brings his own expertise and insight to the use of communication satellites. In this WorldNet program, we would like to give as many of you as possible an opportunity to question directly each of our guests. But due to the number of guests and the number of participating countries today, we will begin with a block of time set aside for each of our guests to respond to questions. After each of them has had an opportunity to respond, questioning will then be open for our participating countries to address anyone on our distinguished panel. On the other hand, if a question in the first block is asked of Dr. Clarke, but Dr. Clarke feels that another panel guest could bring additional information in providing the best answer, we welcome, of course, their participation. The first block of questions will be addressed to Dr. Clarke in Sri Lanka. In the second block, we will go to Captain Cernan. In our third block, to Paris for Commander Jacques Cousteau. And our fourth block will be with Dr. Sharrock. All questioners should please identify themselves and their affiliation. I'd now like to go to London for their first question for Dr. Clarke.
Good afternoon from London. This is Peter Gould from BBC Television News. Can I ask Dr. Clarke, as the man who foresaw communication satellites 40 years ago, what developments do you now expect in the field of telecommunications in the years ahead?
Well, of course, telecommunications will become more and more universal and cheaper and more compact. And I see sometime in the next decade the personal telephone, the wristwatch telephone, or the waist belt telephone, and the development of the global family of mankind. That's the main thing that communication is going to bring.
Good afternoon, Frank Miles of Independent Television News, London. We heard in that film just now that it was said that since the launch of Early Bird, the Earth was radically changed forever. Would you say what, in your opinion, has been the most important single benefit to mankind from geosynchronous satellites?
Well, I'm sorry to say this when a television companies ask you, but I think the telephone service is the most important application. The ability to dial anyone instantly, anywhere in the world. This has transformed my life. I can live here in Sri Lanka and get through to anyone in the world as quickly as I can dial the number. This has been the most important application. The telephone, the global telephone system, which is absolutely essential for business, for commerce, for personal life. Then, of course, television is very close on its heels as the second most important development.
Yes, we have a question. My name is Pierre Kohler from RTL. A question to Mr. Clarke. You were the first one, Doctor, to advocate the geostationary orbit. What do you believe will be new activities in space in the near future? When do you see a lunar base being installed on a permanent basis? Then when will we see a first human colony on an orbital station, a permanent one? And when do you think the first manned flight to Mars will take place?
Well, the answers to these questions are not technical, they're political and economic. We can do anything we want to in space, but when will we have the will and when will we have the money? My guess, and it can be no more than that, is that we will go back to the moon before the end of the century on a permanent basis, rather as we are in the Antarctic now. But I am more interested, frankly, in Mars. I am a member of the Mars Mafia, which is promoting interest in, if possible, an international expedition to Mars. And this I spoke to the U.S. Senate Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee about a year ago, and advocated very strongly a joint United States-Soviet Mars expedition. It could be done in the first decade of the next century.
My name is Matthias Schulenburg, and I'm a freelance science writer. Satellites as instruments of intelligence and verification have served for a long time to preserve peace. Now the military on both sides want to install anti-satellite weapons. Will this make the world a safer place to live in?
No. But satellites can contribute very greatly to peace. They're already doing so. The military are already in space in a benevolent way. The reconnaissance satellites are essential for the preservation of peace. But I hope that we can avoid the stationing of offensive weapon systems in space.
From Rome, this is Franco Foresta Martin from Corriere della Sera. The idea of putting a satellite in a geosynchronous orbit was postulated by Mr. Clarke in 1946. Mr. Clarke, can you name some technical advances of space communication after the year 2000?
Well, first of all, to my Italian friends, I would like to say I have the Marconi Fellowship Trophy here, which I'm very proud. But to answer your question, a substantial percentage of global communications will depend on satellites. There's no question of that. In fact, most mobile communications may depend on satellites. That's the only way you can contact people in aircraft, at sea, wandering around the countryside, in ordinary cars. So they'll just become part of our everyday communications life.
From Madrid,
This is a question posed by Henry Prisville from the Economics Daily Cinco Dias. Dr. Clarke, what do you foresee will be the next revolution in the field of satellite communications?
Well, smaller and smaller and cheaper receiving stations. And in the fairly near future, you'll be able to have a sort of suitcase transmitter receiver. In fact, in the last issue of the ComSat magazine, which has arrived here, I see that ComSat's already making a Earth station small enough to be carried as hand luggage, well, almost about 70 pounds. And I think in the next decade, almost any businessman and journalist will have a small attaché case which you'll be able to contact his home office directly through satellites and be independent of any terrestrial communication system. And think how essential, how valuable this is going to be, particularly in the lesser developed parts of the world.
I am Myron Force from the Administration of Telecommunications in Sweden. We should like to make a question, historic perspective, that is the following. What are the major or most important technical achievements going from the Intelsat 1 satellite, that is from early bird, all the 20 years through up to Intelsat 6? If that could be answered in general words, would be appreciated. And on the one hand, perhaps from a scientific point of view, and on the other hand, from a telecommunication economy point of view.
Well, that is really a technical question which I would like to address, I think, to my good friend Joe Sharrock, with whom 20 years ago we watched the early bird go up into orbit. But that is a highly technical question. However, at one point, I have another souvenir with me, which I'd like to show you. This was given to me by Ambassador Abbott Washburn. It's a part of the original Atlantic telephone cable of 1858. This carried, I think, about 1 word a minute, approximately, when it was working across the Atlantic. So we have seen some incredible communications developments in the last 100 years, and of course they've been eclipsed in the last 10 years.
Okay, this is Jerry Webb, Commercial Space Technologies Limited. Hello, Arthur. You can pass this one on if you don't like it. But I was going to say that in view of the increasingly lucrative nature of the communication satellite business, how can the Intelsat organization answer the challenge of potential competition from the growing number of domestic private communication satellite operators in the USA, Europe, Japan, for the Atlantic and Pacific routes? And how can the aerial patterns of potential competitors be checked in advance? And would not competition be beneficial in any case?
Well, this is a fight I don't want to get into. The competition is very good. Monopolies tend to get fat and lazy. And I think that a certain amount of competition is going to be good for Intelsat, just as the development of cables has been good for satellites, surprisingly, because we had the competition from, I'm not worried about the optical cables. They're be very valuable, of course, for point-to-point communications, and I think they will stimulate ComSat, Intelsat, and the ComSat laboratories. Of course, we have to try and optimize the amount of competition, not get too far one way or the other. But I say there's no simple answer to this, and I'm not going to get into this particular fight. I'm sure my friends at ComSat and Intelsat will come out pretty well.
Thank you, Dr. Clarke. We will now have our first question for Captain Cernan. I believe we return to London. Go ahead, London.
Yes, my question is put by Jean-Paul Croiset, Le Figaro. We'd like to see or hear your opinion about the development of telecommunications in the world. We've witnessed tremendous development in the past years. Do you see it as developing further from a U.S. point of view, slowing down, or possibly stagnating?
Of course, my opinion is based on somewhat on experience, and of course of listening to people that you
you have to admire like Arthur Clarke, who predicted things that would happen in our generation that we were all part of, that I don't think any of us even dreamed about. Now that we've evolved into space, now that we have access to space, I don't think there's any limit to what we can do in a field of communications and any other field that we can utilize that vantage point from. I don't really believe we've begun to utilize or access the availability of communications. What we can dream and what we can imagine, we can make happen from that vantage point. I think education and international awareness, particularly among the young people of the world today, is perhaps one of the most beneficial, aside from the economic and commerce effects of communications, is one of the most important aspects of what world communications has done and certainly will do in the future.
Of Channel 1 television news. Can the growing increase of regional and domestic communication satellites lead to orbital space and frequencies congestion?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. There was a little static, please.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, sir. Can the growing increase of regional and domestic communication satellites lead to orbital space and frequencies congestion?
The question is about congestion in space.
Congestion in space. I've often said in about 20 years I'd like to be the space junk man, because I think there's going to be a lot of big business up there. But I think as technology increases, as we develop the capability for longer life of satellites, we will also develop the capability to remove those satellites which are now obsolete, either bring them back via the development of the space shuttle or the International Space Station, or move them out in outer space and replace them. So I don't think congestion, although there is a limit to the equatorial belt upon which these satellites rest, I don't think that'll be a problem.
I am Eva Frutos from Madrid, from Diario 16 daily newspaper. Should the great increase of the use of new technologies be a reason for fear or hope?
Well, the question, as I understand it, is the use of new technology, should that bring us fear or hope? And certainly I think it should bring us hope. Little did we know of what the technology that was laid in front of us when Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic would truly mean to the evolution of the progress of people in the world today. Technology is a tool. Some people fear it. Others of us use it. I think we must learn to use it wisely, and that is the key. We have opened the heavens. We have opened the universe. It is truly a frontier without a limit. We need technology to find out something that we've all wanted to know. Where have we been? Where are we going? What is this world and this universe all about? With the use of that technology, I think we'll continue to find the answers.
Once NASTAR is installed and the global positioning system works, how could this be used by the average citizen?
Well, I probably won't be able to get technically involved in the answer to that question, but in following up on Arthur Clarke's visions of the use of satellites for navigation for more personal use, I think you will find they're developing domestically now what we call mobile